Okay, so for the meeting, this is just kind of an overview. Our primary objective is to understand what the future of the Knapp property looks like, both if the zoning bylaw passes and if it doesn't. And we feel like that's an important factor in our decision-making about the bylaw. I want to cover what this meeting is not about. It's not about whether or not the town should comply with the MBTA zoning requirements. The meeting is not about the process that we took to get here and which site was selected. And it's not about what the planning board has or has not done in the past 2 years to get us to this point. As an aside, I will say that the planning board would never have brought this mandate forward if it hadn't been imposed by the state. I may not always agree with their decisions, but I have full confidence that they are making the best decisions for what they think is in the town's best interest while trying to meet the state's requirements. So I would say if you have questions on any of those 3 things that we're not going to discuss tonight, make sure you go to the planning board's forum. That's next Tuesday night, right here in the annex. In terms of the agenda for tonight, I have several background slides that I want to share. And that's just to kind of get a common frame of reference for the discussion. Then I'll turn it over to the developer, Mr. Sarkis, and he will talk about potential development plans for the property, and then we'll make time for questions. In terms of ground rules, I'll go over how we're going to run the questions at the end, but I would say if you would just allow myself and Mr. Sarkis to get through their presentations without interrupting the questions, that would be appreciated. And then finally, the last item is that the select board will take a vote on whether to support this bylaw for town meeting. We've intentionally delayed that vote until we heard from Mr. Sarkis, and we are confident that all of your questions were answered. So first, a little bit of a primer on what the select board does. This should be a refresher for those of you that have been in town for a while and know how town government works. But for those of you that are new, I just want to kind of inform you about the role that the select board plays. We are the chief elected official for town government. We set the policy, and then the town manager is the one that's responsible for the day-to-day operations of the town under our policy direction. We're a 3-member board, obviously. We each serve 3 years, and it's set up so that each year one of these seats is up for election. This is entirely a volunteer position. There's no compensation, financial benefits, or otherwise. And I want to point out that we're charged with advancing the public interest, and that's different from serving the public, right? When people say you're there to serve the public, what they mean is you should be representing what I want sometimes. But really what we're charged with is serving the entire public interest, everybody in town, as well as what we know to be in the best interests of the town, looking ahead. I'd also point out that we have no authority over other elected boards, such as the Planning Board, the Board of Health, Board of Assessors. And in fact, like for the Board of Assessors, there's a bright line where we cannot weigh in at all on their decisions about property assessment and that kind of thing. Finally, what's kind of relevant for tonight is we decide what goes to town meeting. So we put items on the warrant, it gets brought to town meeting, and then you all are the legislative branch of the town government, and you decide what gets approved, whether that's the town budgets, capital expenditures, policies, or bylaws. So I'm not going to get into the zoning piece of it because that's not, our role, but we have heard some misunderstandings about what this MBTA zoning is about. So I'm just going to try to, deal with some of the things that we've heard. This is about multifamily housing and about density. So these are the formulas up here. 5% of your total housing units have to be multifamily. So in West Newbury, that would be 87 multifamily units. And there's a density of 15 of those units per acre. So that would be a minimum of about 6 acres. I want to distinguish between zoning requirements, which says we need 87 multifamily units, and the reality based on the fact that we don't have a wastewater treatment plant. The state laws require that if a development was to generate more than 10,000 gallons per day, you have to have a wastewater treatment plant and a state permit. And the way that you get back from that is this Title V estimates that each bedroom generates 100 gallons per person per day. So this 90 bedrooms is what the consultant estimated could be supported on the net property. That's not the same thing as 87 units, and I've heard those two numbers used interchangeably. 90 bedrooms means 30 3-bedroom units or 45 2-bedroom units. So, really we're looking at about half of what we have to zone this property for, somewhere in the range of 30 to 40 units. The final item here I just want to clarify is the affordable housing requirement. So this is not what's sometimes used as houses are too expensive and we can't afford them. This has a very specific definition under state law, and that's that a family that earns 80% of the area median income or less, you have to provide less than market rate prices for them to buy a unit. So given that the state intent for this MBTA zoning is to increase multifamily units and density, they are putting a 10% cap so that towns can't require a developer to have more than 10% of these 87 zoned units be affordable. And they also are saying that you can insert a waiver in your bylaw that says if it's not economically feasible, the developer can get out of that even 10% requirement. So you probably know last week the planning board voted to insert that waiver in the bylaw. It was a split vote, it wasn't unanimous. But the select board believes that the waiver should not be in there. And the reason for that is that other developers in town have to follow what's called an inclusionary housing requirement, which means that if they put in more than 3 units, they have to make it 10%, have to be affordable. So we believe that the MBTA development should follow the same requirements as all the developers in town, all the other developers have had to follow. The second reason we disagree with the waiver is that there's not a clear process outlined for how the developer would show what is economically feasible or not. And we believe that zoning needs to be very clear. There can't be any subjective aspects of it because that makes people feel not confident that the zoning's being followed. So given what I said a few minutes ago about the select board being responsible for putting articles on the town warrant, one of the things we'll vote on tonight is whether we want to remove that waiver from the bylaw that the planning board has proposed. So I just wanted to mention briefly, any development in town has to follow existing state and local regulations. Right? These are some of the regulations they would follow, and this applies also to the MBTA zoning development that would go in town. So that includes wetlands regulations, including the buffer zone requirements, as well as if you impact the wetlands, the developer would have to mitigate that and replace them at a 1-to-1 ratio. Stormwater runoff, any runoff from the site could not be changed from the development. It would have to be the same before the development as after the development. Any soil contamination would have to be remediated. If traffic safety was impacted by the development going in, the developer would have to provide mitigation for that. Steep slopes would have to be addressed, as well as the Title V, which is the septic. It might be that the soils would only support 20 units, so then the developer would be bound to follow that. And then finally, they would have to follow building codes. And I just put the stretch code in here. That's the new green energy building code, and this development would have to follow that as well. So in terms of the site identification process, this is something that the planning board went through, and this was getting from all of the parcels in West Newbury down to what would be proposed as the overlay district location. They got a grant to hire a consultant that helped them with this process. And they used several different criteria, both state suggested and local, of how to get there. They looked at such things as the physical constraints on the property, whether it's a floodplain or whether there's a stream or predominantly wetlands on the property. They looked at regulatory constraints. If there's a conservation restriction on it, it's not available to be developed under this MBTA zoning. They also looked at the size. Anything less than 6 acres would not work, right? So all of those parcels were screened out. And then they also looked at if the parcel was owned by either a utility or a religious organization or a town-owned, that was also removed for consideration. So then what was left, they whittled it down to two parcels, as you know, the Dunn property and the Knapp property. So then the struggle was to which one of those should we bring forward. So they identified what criteria they should look at in order to make this decision. They were able to hire consultants to support them in that, looked at such things as a hydraulic evaluation to know the water supply, how that would be impacted. We did a traffic study. And also, while this wasn't completed to distinguish between the two properties, we did economic feasibility study analysis to see what impact either of these developments would have on the town. Finally, this planning board requested input from town boards and staff, and ultimately they chose the Knapp property. So just some details on the Knapp property. First and foremost, it's a private property, right? The town and the abutters have really no say on what happens on that property. I mean, the owners have been longtime West Newbury residents. Their business is really a landmark of the community. And I'm sure this was a very difficult decision for them to sell the property. And I have heard that they tried for almost a year to find another agricultural buyer so that they could continue it as the icon that it was in West Newbury. Unfortunately, they weren't able to do that, and there's now a purchase and sale agreement with Mr. Sarkis' company, and I understand from him that it's due to close in June or July of this year. So this property will be developed whether or not we pass the bylaw. I just want to show a aerial view of the property. It's 19 acres. This is from my map. You can see up towards Main Street is where the greenhouses and the buildings are. Almost the whole back half is wetlands and wooded, so that wouldn't be a place that development could go in. So in terms of development options, this is what's available right now in West Newbury for any development that goes in. I mean, assuming the MBTA Communities zoning is passed, that's what would govern development of this property. The thing to know about that is it's very explicit. Setbacks, the building heights, the types of buildings, the architectural feel. So this really gives us a lot of control over what that development looks like. Conventional subdivision, that's the zoning that already exists in place. And that, as long as you comply with that, you can pretty much put any kind of structure in there. So there's really no local control over what that looks like. Additionally, we have duplexes are approved by right. So that means if this property, say, were to be able to support 20 units under conventional subdivision zoning, really that could mean each one of those is a duplex, so that's 40 families. So that's what's available by right, regardless of whether we pass the MBTA zoning bylaw or not. This third one, the open space preservation development, this is more of a kind of a special permit process. And the point of this is instead of each house being in a yard with a yard all around them, you kind of cluster all the houses together, and then all the open space is bigger and it's shared by the community. So there are some advantages of that. This also has a 10% affordability requirement. The challenge or the reality with this is some of these projects spend 1 to 2 years going through the permitting process. So it takes quite a bit longer than if something was to be developed under conventional zoning. And then finally, the one nobody wants to talk about is the comprehensive permit, which is the 40B. And this gets back to the affordable housing component. If a town does not have 10% of its total stock qualify as affordable under the state definition, then a developer could come in and develop it under kind of an expedited zoning process, and it's usually a much higher number of units. And we had kind of a near miss with this over on Coffin Street several years ago. So nobody wants that. Currently, just for your information, we have about 2.5% of our housing stock qualifies as affordable. So I don't think we'll ever be able to get to the 10%. So this will always be a vulnerability. I think what protects us somewhat is that we don't have a wastewater treatment system, so that the density of the housing just could not be supported unless it was exceptionally a large property. So I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Sarkis now. I would ask again that you hold your questions till he's through. This section of the presentation is his component. It's not the select board's presentation. And once he's through, we'll circle back and I'll talk about how we're going to do questions and answers. So do you want to take this or do you want me to?
You know what? I think I'd rather have you do that.
Perfect.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is John Sarkis. A little bit of background on myself here. I was a resident of West Newbury for about 25 years. My career has been focused primarily on the development and construction of residential projects, mostly single families, and in some cases multifamilies, as well as some commercial industrial. I graduated college as a civil engineer and have worked basically designing and developing subdivisions for the bulk of my career. In addition to doing my own projects, I have served as a consultant to a number of types of interests. Some of them would be lenders, farmers, where we've helped get agricultural preservation restrictions. Like I said, lenders, where we've helped them analyze the feasibility of projects. Lawyers, where we've been able to translate the complexities of engineering and development as it relates to the law and zoning. We've worked for schools, helping them plan expansions. And we've also worked for homeowners who need a little help trying to get a permit to put a deck on the side of their house. In addition to this, I invest in small apartment complexes. I own and maintain a very small portfolio of mostly modest apartments, all of which, or the vast majority of which, are rent for under $2,000 a month. While I was a resident here in town, I was very active on a handful of boards. Initially, I served on the Comprehensive Plan Committee, helping to produce the comprehensive plan that is still in effect today. I was also a member of the Over 55 Housing Committee. There was a small affordable housing committee for a while, which I served on. And lastly, I was on the planning board for a number of years, I think about 8 years in total. My purpose tonight is just simply to show you the various development options that I'm considering for the Knapp property. As Madam Chair, and I may allude to or provide insight on how state, local regulations, market conditions, demographics, site characteristics, and topography play into these types of decisions on what type of property we might choose to develop there, or what type of development we might choose to put on the property. This is an overview of the general area. I will highlight the boundaries as best as I can here. There we go. That would be the northernmost boundary, and this the southernmost boundary. This is Main Street here. You can see the farm buildings, the greenhouse buildings in this area. That is the pond out in the back. You can go to the next slide. Here's a view of the front portion of the property. It's rotated 90 degrees here. Again, Main Street. This is Harrison Street, and this is Pleasant Street. You can see the approximate boundary here and the approximate boundary there. Next slide. This slide depicts a use by right, or as close to a use by right subdivision as could be constructed on the premises. You will see that there is a cul-de-sac that is just about 1,000 feet long. I believe the local regulations limit cul-de-sacs to 850 feet, so something like this would require a waiver. Most of the cul-de-sacs in town that we're all familiar with have received that type of waiver. Most cul-de-sacs are in fact longer than 850 feet. This plan was developed using topographic, or what we call an existing condition survey. So we have data that shows the boundary lines, we have data that shows where the wetlands are located, and we have topography as well. So the placement of these buildings is set to comply with zoning setbacks, namely frontage, side yard, rear yard, front yard setbacks, as well as setbacks to wetlands and offsets to what would be septic systems on each individual lot. The structures shown on this plan are very much hypothetical, but serve to show that a very large duplex, a two-family building could be constructed on each lot as of right. So each of these meets the side yard setbacks and has space on the lot for a septic system to accommodate the structure. That's not to say, if I develop the site in this fashion, that I would put a duplex on each lot. I would certainly build most or many of them with a duplex. There may be some that after further soil testing only work as a single, or maybe certain lots that just work better as a single family. But for the most part, we would look to do as many duplexes as we could fit here. You can go to the next slide. Here is the same drawing overlaid onto the Google Earth. And you can see its comparison to the adjacent subdivisions. This is Merrill Street, and this is Mechanic Street. This is Newell Farm, I believe. So in general, this plan is similar to what already exists immediately north of it. Next slide. Here's a view of that subdivision, that same subdivision overlaid onto Google Earth again to show where the frontage, how the front might look. Again, the lot line, Merrill Street, and you can see houses, a rhythm of which are generally close to Main Street. This conventional subdivision would mirror that rhythm and put two structures roughly 50 or 60 feet off of Main Street. We can go to the next slide. So the slide that I just showed previously is a depiction of a conventional subdivision. Wendy referred to an open space residential development. OSRD is a provision of the West Newbury bylaw right now, the West Newbury zoning bylaw right now, whereby a developer has the option to avoid or circumvent or develop the site in a more creative way than conventional grid system subdivision would require. In other words, instead of all 1-acre lots or half-acre lots, which this is in the half-acre zone. A developer could choose to go with smaller lots, but provide open space, or could go with condominiums and provide open space. This plan, could you go back? I'm sorry. This plan depicts what an OSRD might look like. The density, the allowable density of an OSRD is derived from the allowable density under conventional zoning. You saw my plan had 13 lots on it, a very defendable plan that would serve as a yield plan. Again, 13 lots, each with a duplex on it, would result in a total of 26 total units of construction. When developing the site under OSRD, the developer would have the option to go up to 26 units. It is important to understand, however, that the actual density allowed is to be determined by the planning board. So as a developer, we would show a conventional subdivision of 13 units for 13 lots for 26 units, and we would request that we be permitted 26 units in the OSRD. However, that decision is from the planning board. They could say we would permit 20 units instead of 26. They could say 13 instead of 26. That said, there are provisions in the OSRD bylaw that state, first of all, its purpose, which is to, some of them are to conserve open space. Number two, preserve certain views, like you'd see on the front of the site here. And most importantly, to preserve or to promote alternative forms of housing. So I'd say it's fair to say that going to an OSRD, providing clustered housing and multifamily would likely be viewed favorably because it produces something other than McMansions. This slide here depicts my preferred way to develop this site under OSRD. I would look to have a roadway that is not perfectly straight, a roadway that would work with the existing topography of the site to limit cuts and fills and limit alteration of the site. I would determine that the front of the site is probably the most valuable open space on the site. It's on Main Street, everybody drives right by it. To me, there's a natural win for me as a developer. It makes for a very nice entrance, and it also leaves the front open where it can appear much more natural. You'll see in this plan a large open area down here. This is where the greenhouses are located right now. This is where we've tested the soils very extensively for septic systems. The best soils on the site exist right there. That is sufficient to hold 90 bedrooms of septic field and a reserve area for 90 bedrooms of septic field. So that area there can hold 10,000 gallons per day of effluent. This structure here would contain 4 units. This is a garage that would serve the 4-unit building. There might be a unit or 2 of flats over the garage, sort of like a carriage house. This would be designed to look like a New England farmhouse with a barn. The other units in the middle are all depicted as duplex, side-by-side duplex, townhouse style. So that would be living area on the first floor and bedrooms on the second. Some of those units show first floor master bedroom suites suitable for an over 55 population, and some of those buildings show 3 bedrooms up on the second floor suitable for all other forms of population. At the end, these would be singles, single-family homes, probably with a bedroom on the first floor. There are 26 units shown on this plan in total. Almost all of it fits within the existing area that is field. I don't believe we actually have to cut any trees other than 1 or 2 of the brush that's at the front end of the site to construct this. This would all remain open space. Everything outside the building area would remain open space. And the lot lines go way past this. This point here is about halfway down the lot, right here. You can go to the next slide. This is a plan that depicts how I would propose to develop the site under MBTA with the information that we know today. The MBTA regulations that the planning board has put forth largely mirror the guidelines and regulations associated with OSRD. They in fact go beyond the OSRD regulations in that there is architectural control associated with them, meaning that the form of the structures is not entirely up to the developer. Can't build a big box there, like the ones you see on the highway down in Wakefield and Peabody. The facades must be broken up. Roof lines are controlled. Dormers are controlled. Garage locations are controlled. This plan shows 32 units. This structure is the same structure you saw on the OSRD plan, essentially, except that I would look to put 6 units in the same structure. They would all be smaller. They might be flats, suitable for someone who needs 1-floor living. All the other structures shown here are typical duplexes. Under MBTA zoning, a single-family structure is not permitted. However, a 2-family structure, or 3 or 4, is permitted. So I would not have the option of doing all, for example, 32 single families here. You can go to the next slide. Here's an example of how that would look as compared to the adjacent properties. Again, this is Main Street. Adjacent structures are all up close to the road. The first building proposed in this MBTA plan is set 200 feet off Main Street. That's deeper than most of the lots that exist on Main Street today. This area where the septic field is would all be open space and grass. This area to the left would be untouched from here to the corner, and the poppies that grow there every year would stay. And the area uphill of it, or up gradient of it, would likely be used for drainage. I believe the drainage basins, as I show them here, are somewhat oversized. I have not done the civil engineering to know for sure yet. When we get through the process, we'll attack that. But my experience tells me that there's plenty of space to fit drainage basins there. You can go to the next slide. Here is the same project overlaid onto the Google Earth again. Do want to point out that, again, the property goes back to about here. This is about the midpoint of the property. You can see that at one point, you can see lines here and lines here. My suspicion is these two parcels, Merrill and Mechanic Street neighborhoods, were probably a similar size parcel to Knapp's at one point and were developed in a similar fashion. You can go to the next slide. We just did this. You can go on one more. I'm sorry. Okay, here's a shot looking from Pleasant Street at the Poppy area and several of the farm use buildings on the site. I would like to point out the distance to where the first structure would be located. You see a white fence here. As you drive by, you might notice that white PVC fence. You see a large glass greenhouse there. In between it, you see some brush. That brush is where the first structure would be located. The entrance road comes in off this screen. You might be able to pick up a barn right in here. That entrance road would come in, sweep to the left, and then sweep to the right, following the topography. Most of this brush would have to be removed. We don't know yet until we do the engineering. Our goal would be to keep as much of it as is possible. To give you an idea what that farmhouse structure would look like, set about 200 feet off the road. I was lucky enough to find this on a Google search. And this is almost exactly what I had in mind for that spot. This represents a large farmhouse with a wing addition to it, a breezeway, and then a barn. Contained within something that looks much like this, under the MBTA plan, I would have a total of 6 units. For example, you could have 2 side by side here, you could have 1 there, you could have a smaller one here, and you could have 1 or 2 in here. All to mimic a typical New England farmhouse and barn. I found it odd that the driveway in this picture sort of looks like the way the proposed roadway would look. And I also liked the fact that the change in topography is much like the change in topography that exists on site right now. So I'd say as a graphic, this is a pretty good graphic of what we'd be looking at from Main Street as the first structure. And we chose a larger structure shaped like a wing, if you will, or a wide footprint, so that it would be able to screen the back of the site from Main Street. You can go to the next slide. This is a view from Harrison Street, the other end of the site. This is the far right side of the site when facing it. Right here is the area where the leach fields would be constructed. The house would be demolished, and the center line of the road, as I show it, goes straight through the house, straight in about 80 feet, and then begins to turn left. My goal was to keep this very large beech tree and keep the large bush that's to the left of it, and hopefully sweep it to the left and not have to take this tree. You can go to the next slide. I'm going to just quickly wrap up a comparison of all three, sort of rapid fire here. This is a conventional subdivision showing 13 lots for a total of 26 units. It is overlaid right onto the MBTA plan that I just showed you. You kind of have to look hard to see through it, though. But you can see the buildings. The first structure on my MBTA plan is located right here, right at that intersection. You can go to the next structure. Here is the OSRD plan, overlaid also onto the MBTA plan. You can see that it's almost identical in its footprint. You can go to the next slide. And here is, again, the MBTA plan. You can go to the next slide. And lastly, for a comparison of how they would look to most of the population of West Newbury when passing by, the two, I did not bother to put the OSRD on here because it's essentially the same as the MBTA plan. You can see them side by side and the difference between what conventional subdivision does to the front and what the benefits of zoning flexibility permits. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, the way that we want to manage questions is the select board will first ask questions. Mr. Sarkis, I have some questions that were emailed to the select board address of people who couldn't be here, so I'll kind of intersperse those in with questions from you. I'm going to ask that if you have a question, please come up to the microphone and say your name and address. We are recording this for people who weren't able to attend, so it's really important that everybody can hear the questions. I will also ask that it be a question and not a comment. I don't want to have a lot of comments. The point of this meeting is to answer people's questions. If we get through everyone's questions and we have time, we might consider taking comments if you have them. I think that's it. So we'll start with the select board. Either of you want to ask Mr. Sarkis questions?
I have nothing jumping out. I have three questions, John, and they're sort of intertwined, and it's all about the what-if scenarios. And the first one would be relative to this property and your plan. What if the MBTA housing fails at the town meeting? The next one is, based on the economic environment we're in right now, what if there's a significant economic adjustment? How does that impact your plans? And then the last one would be, what if there is no waiver from the affordable housing? So those three scenarios, how do they play out on this property with your project?
Okay, so if MBTA does not pass at town meeting, you saw two of the other options. One would be to go with a conventional subdivision and pursue permits for that and construct, as I said, mostly duplexes. That is my preferred route because it simply does not involve a special permit from a municipality. It's an easier, faster route to take that gets me to the end and doesn't involve as much risk. And that ties into your second question. The element of risk is one of the very biggest components in decision-making process for a developer and an investor. I see the way weighing risk and avoiding risk is sort of a natural human reaction or response. People are afraid of change because there's a risk the change might not be good. So we, the same way, weigh it very, very, very heavily, particularly at a time like today. I don't know that I want to be building McMansions if there's a potential Ukraine and Russia could go on. I don't know if I want to be building McMansions if there's going to be extreme tariffs on lumber and building materials. I don't know if I want to be building McMansions if there's going to be an economic slowdown. My position and feeling is that a safer play would be a multi-unit development. It is affordable to a much wider portion of the population. And I would also look to vary my product within the development itself. So taking the MBTA plan that has 32 units shown on it, I would likely look to have 10 of them contain first floor master bedrooms, so they're targeting a senior population. I would look to have another percentage of them be 2 or 3 bedroom units that would be suitable for professionals and families. And then I would look for something on the more affordable end, such as flats or 2 bedroom units even without garages, so that within the same project, I'm catering to 3 markets and selling to 3 markets all at the same time to minimize my exposure, the total time that I'm exposed. We put the road in up front. We buy the land up front, and we put the road in and the infrastructure in all up front. That's a very heavy capital outlay. The sooner we sell the project, the less the interest is on those capital outlays. So we have accounted for that. That is essentially my method of hedging, is I would look to vary the product within the development here. And that's one of the benefits of OSRD and the MBTA zonings. It allows you a slightly greater density to go to smaller units where the profit margin is a lot less, but you're able to get a couple extra, and it makes up for that. The last question was the inclusionary housing. To give you an example, 1/2 of one of the duplexes that you saw on the plan cost me about $500,000 to build. Sticks, bricks only. Throw in the land and throw in the infrastructure, and then throw in interest carry, lawyers, architects, engineers, puts me at, roughly $700,000 a unit, my cost to construct. Under inclusionary, my understanding is that I would be required to sell that unit for approximately $200,000 is the calculation that I came up with. So each of those units, there would be 3.2 in that development that we would have to sell for $200,000, but they would cost me $700,000. That translates to $1.5 million off the bottom line. To answer your question directly, I would probably end up renting rather than selling those particular units, and the numbers don't make sense on them even at renting.
Okay, anything else?
Yeah, one last question, I guess. We've heard the comment about closing June or July of this year. So is that to indicate that this is a done deal?
I have secured the financing to purchase the property. I intend to close in June or July.
Thank you.
So based on that, John, when would you anticipate moving forward?
If MBTA passes, we would immediately put the design and process for that and move forward. If MBTA doesn't pass, I don't know, honestly. I have at least 2 development options to consider. I could also consider waiting and see if the planning board's inclined to do something at the fall town meeting for another attempt at MBTA.
Did you have any questions?
I've also been asked about 40B. It is a consideration, it's not a preference. 40B is interesting in that it, of course, does not, like all the other provisions, does not allow you to go to the state for your Concom, your health and environmental. So we would still have to comply with local regulations for wetlands as well as septic, which means that we would have the same 10,000 gallons a day limitation, same 90 bedrooms. My thought was if it ever came to that, I would look to do a rentals for seniors on the property, which would, at 10,000 gallons a day, would permit up to 66 units of rentals for, and they can be, under 40B, they can be restricted to elderly. And the benefit to the town is if they are rentals, then all 66 units would count, even though only 25% of them would be restricted affordable, all 66 of the units would count towards West Newbury's requirement to have 10%. So a project like that would move the town a lot closer to full compliance. Again, not my preference, and I have not vetted the finances on anything like that. So I don't want anybody here to think that it's totally an option. We've done just enough due diligence to know that we need to do more due diligence on it.
Do you know what your overall time frame for development is? If MBTA passes and you were to move forward, what are we looking at for construction?
So with MBTA or OSRD, since they're so very similar, I have a much easier way of, as I said, targeting different demographics. I wouldn't have, for example, if I had all the units designed for seniors, I have to wait for 30 some odd seniors to show up to buy them. But if I have some for seniors and some for families and some for disabled people, then I'm catering to all 3. So that would allow me to shorten my overall development time. We can build as fast as we can sell, for sure. I would suspect, based on the absorption rate that we've seen in townhouse projects recently in Boxford and in Haverhill and some of the other communities south of here, as well as some in southern New Hampshire, that we would be looking at about a 1 to 2 year sellout and probably a 2 to 2.5 year build out.
Okay, thanks. Anything else here? So we'll take questions from the audience. John, if you want to sit over, could he use this microphone so that if you want to take a seat over here with that microphone. I mean, I'd like you to come up to the microphone, and if you could address your question to me, and I'll determine whether one of us will answer it or Mr. Sarkis will answer it.
Rob Phillips, 77 Coffin Street. I was wondering, under the 4 options, which option provides the town the most control over appearance? I know that when we did the master plan, the comprehensive plan, sorry, Chris, that one takeaway we had was that we're going to build out. We will build out. That's a fact. The way to do it is to try and make things look better, have less impact on the visual. That's in fact why the state came up with open space residential development. So I'm just wondering, of the 4 approaches, which one gives the town the most control over appearance?
I believe that's the MBTA zoning. Would you agree with that, John?
There's 2 parts to that. I would say the fact that OSRD requires a special permit allows the planning board more control over the shape and the locations of the structures and the circulation within. And I would say that MBTA has more control over the structures themselves. That said, the shape of the parcel and the topography of the parcel and the location of the best soils on the site are the same for either situation, and they tend to govern just as much as the regulations do. They will drive the design just as much as the regulations do. So it's difficult to answer the question definitively because each has their parts, but effectively, because of the topography and because of where the soils are and because of how drainage works, at the end of the day, the MBTA, has the one other element of architectural and massing control that OSRD does not.
Okay. Rob? Could you stand up to the mic? I mean, we want to make sure everybody can hear it.
So just to follow on with that, John, you discussed open space residential development and MBTA. Conventional yields what control over appearance, and 40B yields what control over appearance?
Okay. Conventional zoning is limited really to health, safety, and welfare. Namely, if you produce or if you design a roadway that complies with the horizontal and vertical requirements of the planning board, and you address the drainage, and you have lots that are shaped and sized according to zoning, then you're entitled to a permit. And the plan I showed for the conventional subdivisions far exceeds the minimum requirements under conventional zoning. I believe every one of the lots there was about an acre or greater. Maybe one of them was a little smaller. The minimum in that district is 20,000 square feet, a half an acre. So I show on a subdivision plan, we do not even show the buildings or proposed buildings. We show only the roadway and the lot lines and the method of dealing with drainage. And as long as traffic works, as long as the lots work, then a developer could sell the lots individually and have multiple builders building whatever they want in there as long as they meet setbacks. Or the developer could build out the houses as he deemed fit. Under 40B, there is less restriction. I think the big takeaway between 40B and MBTA in West Newbury would be the allowable height. There is, under the proposed MBTA regulations, the allowable height is restricted to pretty much what we have in town right now everywhere else. Under 40B, the building is not restricted. It could be 50 or 60 feet tall, and there would be no particular architectural limitations on its massing. So, again, it's not my preference, but when you build in mass like that, you have to take advantage of economies, particularly when you're restricted to 25% being affordable. It's difficult to make some numbers work with that. So you resort to more units in one building. So there's, for example, only one elevator servicing 48 units, not two buildings of 24 and two elevators and two sets of garage doors or whatever the case may be.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Stephen Swallow from River Road. My question is, if I can see you highly favor the MBTA plan that you've so well researched over the other two, and are making a case to all of us citizens that that's your preference. None of these would be my preference, but that's maybe selfish. But with the MBTA plan to begin with, and I want to know for all three, will we be required by the MBTA to have a MBTA station within a half a mile of Nat Florist? That's the first question.
The answer to that is no.
I can't hear you.
The answer to that is no. There's nothing in the MBTA zoning that requires us to have a station.
With the second two plans, would we have to do that?
No.
There's nothing to do with the MBTA stations in this zoning bylaw.
And I understand, with all due respect, John, that you must have a purchase and sales or something on this property. You don't own it yet, is that correct?
I have a purchase and sale agreement on the
Yes,
property.
yes, and you know, the town has been looking ahead into the future of keeping it a beautiful place, and there are all kinds of issues, such as if we can't bring the dogs, I don't have any, but down
Steve,
by
do you have
Mill
a
Pond.
question to ask? Do you have
This is a question, yes it is, Wendy.
Okay.
Why don't we build a dog park? There's a lot of stuff about pickleball courts. Why don't we take something like that and make things that would enhance the community instead of stress our school systems, stress our fire department, and stress every other public service that we have? That's the question.
The answer
What?
to that is it's private property. The town has no ability to dictate what
The
happens.
town can put in an offer for it.
It's under a purchase and sale agreement right now.
Louder, please.
It's under a purchase and sale agreement right now.
I understand that.
Yep,
Thank you.
thank you. Ross?
Hi, my name is Ross Capilupo. I live at 9 Kent Court. So it does seem, I think I deduced that the order of preference for those three options was the MBTA, then a traditional development, and then thirdly would be the open space. So I guess that would be my first clarification. Is that accurate?
For the developer or from the town's perspective?
For the developer.
Yeah.
Was that order correct?
Yes, my preference would be the MBTA plan,
Yeah.
primarily because it would allow me to start construction probably sooner than any other method of developing the site. And as was alluded to, we're in a little bit of uncertain times. I think that would probably be best for all of us.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that's, you kind of just answered my second question, because you were drawing parallels between MBTA and the open space, but Wendy, you had said at the beginning that open space has a long timeline for permitting. So I guess my question was, if MBTA passes, you're saying that from a permitting and construction standpoint, it would differ from the open space and that you'd be able to get right into it?
It would differ, yes. That's not to say that going through the OSRD process could go quick. It hasn't in the past.
Yep.
It rarely does. Special permits typically take longer. In this case, if MBTA does pass, it still has to go through site plan review. But site plan review is really a check to see if it complies with the regulations that are stepped forward. It does not involve a sort of give and take the way an OSRD would.
Thank you.
I'm just going to insert one of the questions that were written in, and then I'll take you. John, the question is, what community-focused benefits do you intend to offer as part of this project, if any, like common space areas or things like that for the community that lives there?
We would look to do walking trails for sure. There's some land behind it that is pretty nice. And unfortunately, it doesn't really connect very well to other town land. I wished it did. That'd be a nice amenity for the residents of the project itself. But there's not much space. I mean, we really would like to leave the front open. I find that to be the biggest benefit to the town is that the character of Main Street is not radically altered under OSRD or MBTA plans that I have. And I suppose even with a conventional zoning, it's not radically altered in that the neighbors' houses are all similar to that. But why not have some open space right on the street if we can get it? We want to leave the poppies there too.
Right, okay. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Chris Comfort. I live on Crescent Drive. And my question is with regard to the vote on April 28th, am I correct that a yes vote means that a person is in agreement with the MBTA plan that Mr. Sarkis put forth tonight, and a no means you don't agree with that plan? Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. A yes vote means that you accept the bylaw that the planning board has prepared, and that is before the town, which states all of the requirements for the construction, the architectural requirements, the setbacks, the screening and that kind of thing, as well as identifies the Knapp property as the location for the overlay district.
Understood.
So those are his proposed plans, but that's not what we're voting on.
So it's just a matter of accepting the fact that the town has identified the Knapp property as to be developed for this purpose?
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hello. Hello. As a reference point, I was on the planning board at the time Barbary Drive was put in, and so my subject is traffic control, safety, access, pedestrians. Also, I live across from Newell Farm Drive at Crosswalk on Main Street. And so those are my qualifications, I guess, to think about this, not from the housing side, but the egress and to and from. And if 87 units is probably 250 or more residents, so that's whatever the numbers may be in automobiles, pedestrians, children, sidewalk loads, crosswalk loads, sidewalk being the opposite side of the street. The Barbary Drive onto Main Street, the state and the planning board at the time did some modifications, including, because the state was involved, and they will be in this one regarding your access. So it baffles me a little bit to see that the street entrance is somewhat halfway between Pleasant and Harrison Avenue. The site distances, the curve to the west is the approaching traffic, similar but not unlike eastbound traffic when you're trying to get out of Barbary Drive to go east. It would seem logical, and I'm sure plenty of people will speak about this later, of crosswalks on Main Street, pedestrian push to walk across, and perhaps relocation of all of your plans showed the street entrance somewhat in the geographical middle of the lot. It seems to me that there's room to squeeze up the tangent a little bit to the east to provide for more reaction time. Those are all numbers that people look up in textbooks and you'll deal with. So I don't know if you have an answer, but I would like that to be a subject that is given due thought, because you're creating a situation on Main Street which is already, to those of us who live there, quite a place to try to drive and gain access to. Thank you.
Could you state your name and address? Just
I can't hear you.
name and address. I know who you are, but just for the record.
I'm so deaf, David.
Name and address.
What is she? Oh, John McGrath, 244 Main Street.
Thank you, John. So, do you want to answer about the concerns about the driveway entrance?
Sure. So yes, we did consult with traffic engineers about the most appropriate location for a roadway in that area, and Mr. McGrath's points are well taken. The opportunity to put a road in line with Pleasant Street did not exist. It was too far off it was just off the being directly opposite the site, and would also result in a wetland crossing to go across the swale that's there, and it would also result in the loss of the poppies. So we didn't like that. To go at the far right end, or I guess west end of the site, would be almost in line with Harrison Street. That had less sight distance to the west, although I believe it did comply. I believe it had sufficient sight distance to the west to meet DOT standard, Mass DOT standards. There was more sight distance gained by moving the entrance, the access point, to the center of the site. So essentially between Harrison and Pleasant. And it more than complies in both directions. Sight distance more than complies with DOT's regulations, and I believe there was a study done, the selectmen commissioned a study to assess that as the planning board was trying to determine which parcel was better suited for this.
Yep. Thank you.
Gillian Knowles from Chase Street. Is that enough address? Yeah. I have questions around affordability. Median household income in West Newbury is either $189,000 or $181,000, depending on where you look. 80% of that is about $150,000. This is household income per year.
Yeah.
So my question is, you could just get under that and you could be able to get one of these. So these are not affordable units, clearly. They're not, I don't know how you call them affordable, but maybe, and they're definitely not low income. You know.
So if I could clarify, the affordability is based on the area median income, which is not West Newbury's. We're in the HUD area we're in includes Lawrence and surrounding towns.
Okay.
So it's lower than what the actual median income in West Newbury is.
Here? Oh, that's
and
encouraging.
it depends on the number of people in the family. So it's a different limit, whether you have 2 people in the family or 6 people in the family, that influences the limit.
All right.
Yep.
So do we know what that is then? I want to know.
Yeah, I think I don't have the numbers in front of me.
Okay.
There's a graph, I can certainly provide it to you. It's on the Affordable Housing Trust website if you want to take a look at it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. John was talking about maybe rentals for seniors, and also helping out seniors, families. Okay, and disabled people. What about the public safety people in West Newbury and the teachers and they can't live in West Newbury. They do not have enough income to live here. Is this affordability gonna actually allow some of them to live here?
Well, I mean, to be clear, the MBTA is not about affordability. It's about increasing multifamily housing and making housing more dense. So the affordability discussion is 10% of the total would qualify as affordable.
Would qualify.
Yeah.
And so I have one final question for John. He says that he would sell a unit for $200,000 to someone who was correct. That seems to be what you were saying. And you'd lose $500,000 in the building. Is that a duplex or a half a duplex?
The 200,000 figure is a result of the state formula, the AMI, Area Median Income Formula.
Right.
When you apply that, it means that it translates to a sale of approximately $200,000. And that unit would cost me, about $700,000 to construct.
That's like half a duplex, right?
That would be any unit, it does not matter what unit it is.
Okay,
So even if it was a one-bedroom flat, for example,
Yeah.
I would have to price that one-bedroom flat at something that someone who makes 80% of the area median income could afford. So obviously a one-bedroom flat would cost me less than the half a duplex.
Yeah.
But the formula applies to everything. It's the same formula.
All right, so let's go back to MBTA not requiring affordability. What the 10% requirement is a state requirement, apparently, is it?
No,
Where does the 10% affordable housing on your development come from?
So the MBTA requires that towns cannot force the developer to build more than 10%. It's not a requirement to build 10%. The developer could build no affordable housing if they so chose, as long as there's not a waiver in the MBTA bylaw.
Okay, so the select board is asking, or is going to put up, let us not allow John to waiver that, correct?
We are going to discuss that, yes.
Yes, thank you, that's good. Okay, and John, just
Can
getting
I,
back.
there are other
I know
people
there are
waiting.
others.
Can
Okay,
you-
just one more question on this. So what percent are you proposing to
It's
do?
not up to me to propose anything right now.
Proposing of the affordability?
I-
That you're
I-
not, that's not, you're
It's
not
it's not my job.
He would have to follow whatever was in the MBTA bylaw.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Dan Lucier, 3 Pleasant Street. A few quick questions. From the studies, are those available that we can get access to?
Yes.
Especially like water drainage and things like that?
There hasn't been any water drainage studies, but the ones that I mentioned, the water supply that was done by Tata and Howard, the economic impact analysis, the traffic study. There's a town projects webpage on the town website, and it has all the plans, all the public hearings. It's also linked on the planning board webpage.
So if the water drainage studies have not been done yet?
No, those would be specific to the development, so there's not a specific development before.
Okay, there's a lot of wetlands.
Right.
Like between Pleasant and Harrison that, there's a lot of concern of.
No, I understand that.
Okay. And then as far as, if this were to go in and we went with OSRD or the MBTA, how close does that get us to meeting the requirement of MBTA if we approved it as a town?
If we approve the zoning bylaw, then we
Yep.
are in compliance.
That would fill the requirement?
Yeah, we don't have to build a thing, we just have to pass the bylaw.
we have to pass the bylaw, but we have to zone enough area for the units
Right.
available, and from what I saw, we're not meeting that requirement.
So the bylaw will zone for 87 units, but all we have to do is pass that bylaw. That dictates the terms of the development, but the actual development, it doesn't matter if no units are built on it, ever. As long as the town has passed the bylaw, we've satisfied the MBTA requirements.
There was a set number of units, 36, I think I saw.
That's what he's proposing, if he was gonna build it.
And we had 40 that you had stated because of the septic requirements.
That was a
Right.
general number. I said 30 to 40, depending on how many bedroom units. These are all just projected numbers. The bylaw is about the zoning capacity, zoning that could be built. But the actuality depends on whoever develops it, what they determine is most economical. I mean, really, that's to be determined at this point. We're just making projections.
Okay, so if this were to go, we don't have to find another area in town to
No.
help meet?
No.
Okay. All right, I think I'm good.
You're welcome. John, another question was, how will the design of the development reflect and preserve the traditional New England character that defines our town?
Well, I provided a slide that showed the particular style that I'd like to see at the very front, which is a farmhouse, much like several of the other farmhouses along Main Street. And then within the development itself, most of it would not be particularly visible to anybody except those who live there. I have actually contracted with an architect who specializes in traditional New England development, and I'd say if you wanted to get a sense of what his buildings look like, if you are familiar with Amesbury, there are a bunch of white buildings built off River Road in Amesbury, off Pleasant Valley Road. They go up a hill there. It's the MZO group. They're fantastic, very traditional looking. And there's also another project in Middleton he's done. He came from, if anybody is familiar with Claude Mikkel, who Claude Mikkel was an architect who specialized in traditional New England architecture. And he is the M in MZO Group. And I've worked with the Z in MZO Group for 20-something years. He's done a number of my structures. And it's a style that I prefer. Okay. So I'm trying to remember the names of these projects, but I'm sorry that I can't.
All right.
Say that again? Bartlett's Reach in Amesbury. That's it. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Steve Bloom, Pleasant Street. Biggest concern that I have after listening to all of this is what is the draw on the water supply in town? We have a relatively small reservoir. We're always entering to additional conservation restrictions, which isn't a bad thing. Considering the numbers that have been put out there, 10,000 gallons per day, the math is relatively simple for how much water can be drawn in a year. How does that affect the rest of us as well? That's not an insignificant amount of natural resources.
Yeah, if you look on the town website, on that projects page I mentioned, you can see the hydraulic analysis that was done.
So that was done?
Yes, and they determined that the impact, Angus, is this correct? The impact would be negligible in terms of...
It could be absorbed. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Sorry.
yeah, there was a study done by the Water Commission's engineering consultant, and they found that there was sufficient supply and fire flow in both this and the Dunn property. That is not to say it's all locally provided. As you may know, the town pumps about 60% of its water and purchases about 40% of its water from Newburyport. So that's a combination of pumped and purchased water. But that's the existing condition. It wouldn't be different here. So that was looked at.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Kevin Bowe, Maple Street.
Couple of quick questions. So first off, just to clarify, on the 28th of April, we are not voting on a development. Yeah, exactly. We're not voting on a development. We are voting on a zoning.
Bylaw.
Bylaw. Yes. And to that, John, how many, you said 26 and 32 were our different unit options, you know, MBTA versus conventional?
Correct.
Okay. And how many bedrooms in both of those?
I would be limited to a maximum of 90 bedrooms within the property, within the project, by the septic regulations.
So right now, it's still planning, so you're not quite sure, but some iteration that gets you to 90 or somewhere around there.
I can't exceed that.
Yeah.
What I had on the plan there would be less than 90.
Right. Yeah, I was just trying to get a feel how many 2 bedrooms
Yep.
versus 3 bedrooms. But again, I know that's the actual rubber hits the road kind of stuff when we hit it. And I guess my other question is, you know, clearly you were asked and you made it clear that if the MBTA zoning bylaw is passed, you are like putting the foot on the gas. And you also alluded to the fact that, you know, if the MBTA is not passed, that there's a lot of options that you have, and you'll reevaluate the options and all that kind of stuff. But I guess I'm just wondering, you know, are you still foot on the gas for the for purchasing that in June, regardless of what we vote on the 28th?
Yes.
Okay.
Josh DeVos on 16 Crane Neck Street. Kind of teeing off that. Regardless of how this goes, yes or no, your sale closes summer. When is the next opportunity to engage with the public as far as how this is, or which direction this is going to go, I guess?
Well, if the MBTA bylaw passes at town meeting, then that's the direction it's going. If it does not, and Mr. Sarkis chooses a different kind of development, potentially that would go before the planning board, and then there would be an opportunity for public input. But in terms of which path is chosen, it would be defined already.
So let's say MBTA passes, planning board meets on Tuesday, that's open to the public? Or I just want to, like, regardless of what happens, the next time, like, when's the next time we can see kind of where this project is going, that we're allowed to, or the town is allowed to see?
So if MBTA passes, I meet with my designers and we come up with a plan to submit. And then we submit it to the planning board for what's called a site plan review process. And at that time, you would be able to see everything. And you'd be able to sit in on the meetings.
At that would be part of a
Yep.
week, whatever it is, monthly, weekly, whatever it is.
Yeah, those meetings are posted at least 48 hours in advance, and you'll have full access to what's discussed.
Thanks.
Yep.
I'll make it quick. Joe Clocker, 11 Norino Drive. Quick question. If the bylaw goes to vote and it includes the low-income housing requirement, no matter which scenario you pick, you will include apartments in that plan? Is that what I heard?
I
Just to
would
make
say
your
most
numbers work?
likely, yes.
Most likely, yes.
Very much most likely, yeah.
Okay, and no matter what the plan you choose is, if it passes, is there an HOA associated with that? Because who's going to maintain that whole open space and all that good
Correct.
stuff?
There would be, under the OSRD concept and under MBTA concept, there would be a homeowners association that would maintain the property as well as the septic system.
And even if you did the duplexes in your own plan, would also have some form of an HOA to keep?
Possibly, probably not, hopefully not. I should back up too before, it's also important to know that under OSRD, as I had it drawn there and proposed, and MBTA, the roadway would also be maintained by the homeowners and not the town. Under the conventional subdivision, we would look to turn the road over to the town, and the town would be responsible for plowing and maintaining the road.
Interesting.
And if I can just-
Sorry, that's
So
right.
in the conventional subdivision, would the individual homeowners be responsible for their septic systems, or would there be a?
There would not be a common septic
Okay.
system situation with the conventional subdivision. There would be 13 septic systems on the site at that point.
Because you know how fast a neighborhood can go downhill really quick if people stop maintaining, if they're responsible for their own property and one guy's doing it, one guy's not, then, so if you have the HOA, at least you're assured that it's going to be maintained. One last question for the board. First of all, God bless you guys and the planning board, because I tried to read that whole state thing today. It was in, don't tell anybody at Raytheon, it was in between meetings, all right, so, so for you guys, if this fails, what's the next step?
The next step would be to try again in the fall. We have until December of this year in order to pass this and remain in compliance. So we have one more town meeting before then.
Okay, but it would be probably for a different property?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
The planning board would have to discuss how best to proceed.
Because I found it very interesting that we could come up with a plan and get it approved. And if it was for a property that nobody had a plan to build anything on, nobody would build anything on it, and we'd still be in compliance, right?
Yeah.
Hi, Paula Jump. I live on Merrill Street. Loud. I know you haven't done drainage studies yet. As you can imagine, that you will be building in my backyard. That is my concern. When you do these drainage studies, I assume, am I correct, I guess, to assume that you consider the effect it's going to have on us? And when the timing of that drainage study will be very different. If you do it today, it's going to look very different than if you do it in July or August. It's very wet. There's a brook. I'm sure you've walked the property. It's very wet in our yards. I know I've spoke to my neighbors about this. We're very concerned about how this development, whichever one it looks like, how that's going to impact our property.
Yeah, so you should know in West Newbury we have a stormwater bylaw which governs things like that. So it's not going to be only up to the developer to look at the drainage studies. Their plans are going to have to be approved by the planning board as well as the Conservation Commission. And the requirement is no net change in stormwater flow off the property before and after.
But doesn't that depend on when the study's done?
Yes, and that's why the Conservation Commission and Planning Board will make sure that the study accurately represents year-round conditions so that there's no net change.
Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to ask another question while we wait for the next person. How will the project affect traffic patterns and road safety in our town? I think you kind of broached on that. Do you have any plans beyond the location of the driveway? Do you think any mitigation is going to be necessary to improve safety in that area?
I am not a traffic engineer.
Okay.
We would have a traffic engineer assess all that and tell us what, if any, improvements may or may not be needed. From my experience, I do not suspect that we'll need to widen the road. I do not suspect we'll need a deceleration lane. I do not suspect we'll need a traffic light. I do suspect we'll want a crosswalk. And then there may be some, cleanup of the side, the side of the road in spots.
For visibility.
For visibility,
Yep.
yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Some signage, of course.
Yep.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Perry Conrad, 7 Merrill Street. Hi, I had 2 questions, actually. One for yourself, Wendy. I think it was stated that initially, and a gentleman brought it up earlier about the 87, okay, the 87 units, which was the mandate by the state, okay, and you picked the Knapp property, okay, which can only hold 40, supposedly. How does that meet the needs of the state? I don't follow that, and I believe many people don't understand that as well. I know there was discussions about, on one of the planning board meetings, of going behind Merrill and also towards Crane Neck as expansion. Is that part of the MBTA?
No, it is not. That was brought up not by the planning board. That was brought up by somebody in the audience. That's not currently the plan.
No, they presented slides on it.
So let me answer your first question. The 87 units, that's what we're required to zone. That's 5% of our current housing stock, which is about 1,700. So all that is we have required to zone for that. And that formula comes from the state. It applies to every city and town across the state. It's not specific to towns that don't have a wastewater treatment plant. So the number 87, as long as we put that in our bylaw and we've zoned for that, we are in compliance, no matter how many units are built, even if no units are built on that property.
Okay, and then the other question would be for Mr. Sarkis. Thank you for presenting the material you had here, but I did have a question. I think Wendy presented earlier that, sorry, the height of this thing right now. Wendy presented that traffic is under your responsibility, and the estimate that the town or the contracting company that they used to get the estimate was pretty conservative. I think they mentioned it was only going to be 0.67 kids per unit in one car per unit too. So, and I think what I saw, it was only going to be like 14 cars leaving on any given morning. That's very conservative in there. I guess the reason I bring this up, because again, you'd be responsible for the traffic coming out of that complex. With the cost, you said it was like $700,000 you have to put into it, okay, minimum, for cost. But you're not going to sell it for $700K. You're going to probably sell it for $900K, I would think, at a minimum for these type of units. So with today's mortgages on that, I think it's like 6-point-something%. You're probably now going to be close to $5,200, if almost $6,000 per unit for a mortgage. So that's two incomes for any person living there. So it'd be two incomes because, that's a lot of money to afford. It's almost $6K per month. So again, back to your traffic and about the number of people there, I think that's very conservative to say you're only going to have like 14 cars leave in the morning. You're not going to have one car. Everybody's going to have two cars because you're going to need two incomes. So you're doubling the traffic out of that area. So some of that's not associated to yourself, John. It's more associated to the town on their traffic study. But you're going to be responsible for that.
Yeah, if I could clarify, that traffic study was done as a way to evaluate the two properties, Knapp versus Dunn. And the developer would have to do their own traffic study. That was just for internal purposes, so that would have to be verified by the developer's engineers and traffic specialists.
But it also gets back to the demographics. We're talking about close to $6,000 a month mortgage.
Yeah.
$5,800 to $6,000 a month for a mortgage for a house or a duplex in that area. And so how does that really help our town? That's, again, not towards yourself, John. It's more towards the town.
Yeah, I guess the answer is, this is not about helping the town. This is about meeting the requirements of the MBTA compliance, and we will do it in such a way that the town is not negatively impacted. Yeah. But all of those things need to be fleshed out with any development that happens.
Thank you. And does
Can
rental
I answer
property?
that?
Oh, go on. Yes, you had a question?
I did read the traffic study that the town commissioned, and it's about 14 cars per hour at peak times in the morning.
Yeah.
So it's not that the development and it was also based on a larger number of units than I am proposing. But it wouldn't surprise me if a development yielded about 14 cars an hour at the peak in any morning or coming out. But it's important to understand as related to multifamily units. They're typically not occupied by families with children, even though we'll try to design them so they're suitable for it. They typically don't get absorbed by that type of client. They're typically absorbed by single professionals or married couples just starting out, and retirees. So the number of school-age kids is likely to be, I would suspect even less than 0.67 per unit in this development. So it's a different demographic. And in my opinion, the benefit to it is that particularly the houses that get sold to the retirees, is they move out of their house and they open up the house that they're in now to go to something that requires no maintenance or has a homeowners association. And a family can buy that other house, and the family that's buying that house is selling the one they're already in, and it opens that house up too. So in my opinion, we're doing, by catering to a retiree demographic, and I wish I could cater the whole thing to it, I think it does the most for the region as a whole to address the housing shortage that we have.
And then on apartments, that doesn't give us any relief from a tax base. I mean, they don't pay taxes on, so it doesn't give us any relief on that. But how many were you looking at if it was going to go to apartments into that area? I wasn't too clear on that.
It could be up to 66 apartments under 40B if reserved for 55 and older.
Okay. So 40B is for 55 and older, or is that affordable income? Affordable?
No, the 40B it's a state permit that if you don't meet your affordability requirements, it's a streamlined process to develop a parcel, and it's usually much more dense than any of the other developments we've talked about. So that's what John was talking about. In order to make that work, it would have to be about 66 or 67 units.
Right.
That's different.
And if this was an MBTA zone for MBTA, what is it currently zoned as?
Just regular residential, conventional subdivision could be built
and
there.
that's duplexes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not necessarily duplexes, but duplexes could be built there,
Okay.
yeah, by right.
All right, thank you. I appreciate your time.
Yep. Go ahead.
Have the opposite problem as Perry. Kathy Ellis, 202 Main Street. I have two questions, points of clarification for Mr. Sarkis that I'd appreciate. The first being one that has been long rumored and discussed, and I think it's completely not on the table anymore, but there's been a lot that has still been discussed, was that this parcel, when it was in the discussion to be sold, that Mr. Sarkis was in agreement to build 4 units on the property. And it was initially 4 houses, and then there's a lot of discussion that it's 4 condo development, 4 condo units. So I think the number 4 is probably long gone, and I would just like your clarification on that point first off, and then I'll ask a second question. Appreciate it.
I'm not sure whether you're talking about rumors of a prior development?
No, the rumors from the seller having an agreement with Mr. Sarkis that the property would contain 4 houses at one point.
It's up to you.
Current owners initially hoped to provide for their retirement with 4 units or 4 lots. And the situation, once we got into understanding the costs of removing the buildings and cleaning up the site, it made that not feasible.
Okay. And then there was a follow-up with it being 4 condo buildings that would have multiple condos. So that also is not, I mean, it's not something, it is something I have read going around and that people are confused about.
What has been shown tonight is condominiums, duplex units.
And it's a much higher number. So my second question for you is, if the MBTA, if the town chooses not to pass that at town meeting, I understand that you are intending to build on that site, and is there any input from the town or the planning board as to which of those other options, the conventional subdivision, which would put houses right on the street and just line them up, versus what appears to be a more appealing layout of an OSRD, if I understand the terminology? Is there any input, or is that totally your choice and up to your economics?
I mean, that's the developer's choice. I mean, he will own the property at that point, and he can choose the direction forward. The town would have input in the permitting process. The town, meaning the planning board, and we as residents could participate in that process.
Okay, Thank you.
Yep. Go ahead.
Nancy Weil, Main Street. I just want to make sure I'm clear, because I find the two things sort of complicated or convoluted. So, first of all, we're here to talk about the MBTA, more or less, whether we're going to vote for that, correct?
Kind of.
Okay.
I mean, the purpose of this meeting, because the context of everything is the MBTA and whether we're going to pass it. But because there is an ongoing purchase and sale and development plan, this meeting specifically was to say, okay, well, what is that? What's on the table? And hopefully that will help us decide whether to approve the zoning or not.
Okay, so I have two questions then. If it doesn't pass, I think I understand you are going to develop the property, correct?
Correct.
Okay. If it doesn't pass, if the MBTA doesn't pass, how does that affect the town? What is the price that the town pays? How do we, I mean, nobody wants to see land developed. Everybody, I think, loves Naps, and I wish it was still Naps.
Right.
That being said, it's going to be developed because it's private property and they have a right to sell it and he has a right to develop it. If the MBTA thing doesn't pass, how does that affect the rest of the town? What's the cost to the town for that?
Yeah. So we would have one more opportunity at the fall town meeting to attempt to pass it. If we don't pass a bylaw by December of this year, then we'll be out of compliance. That would make us ineligible for a large number of grants, some of which we currently have and are planning to apply for. It's also possible there would be legal action against the town. I mean, this is all brand new. We don't know how far this will be taken in terms of enforcement, but there will be a real cost to the town if we don't comply with it. Any other questions from folks? Okay. Why don't you come up here so we can hear you, please?
Charlie Bellavo, Garden Street. So John, to clarify, if the MBTA passes, it's going to be MBTA?
Yes.
No other way around it? So
That would be the smartest, safest, best, most fitting option for me, yes.
But is that a legal requirement, or could you still say, I don't want to do that, I'm going to do...
No, it's not a legal requirement.
Okay, you still have the option to do whatever you want within the confines of the planning board and so forth and so on.
Correct.
But
if MBTA passes, I could still propose a conventional subdivision. I could propose an OSRD. I could do 40B. I could make it a horse farm. Right. I could do something else. Poppies.
But for the record, your preference, if it passes, is to do the MBTA project, kind of like what you outlined tonight.
I fully intend to build or to propose an MBTA project as closely resembling what I've shown here tonight, that is based on the current bylaw. The plan that I showed is based on the current bylaw that's proposed. And if that bylaw were to be radically altered, it could affect the drawing. It's part of what goes into it. It's based on all the engineering data that I have to date. I have not done the stormwater analysis yet. That may push a building around here or there. It might shrink a building. But this is not my first paper route.
Right.
For those of us who remember what paper routes were, this is not my first paper route. I started out designing these types of things. I believe what I've proposed is something that would be likely built, or very, very, very close to it.
One final question. What does the town have, how much control does the town have over John's proposed MBTA project if it goes that route?
He would have to go through site plan review with the planning board, and that would be the only control.
So it'll be the same for any project that he did?
This is a little, site plan review is a little bit less rigorous process, I would say, than a special permit, like for the OSPD. But, yeah.
All right, thanks, Tom.
Okay.
Just a quick question. Did the planning board consider any other properties for this overlay besides Knapp's and the Dunn property?
Yes, they took every property in West Newbury and screened out ones that were not appropriate. It was a very extensive screening process.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, folks, thank you very much. I appreciate your attendance and your respect in there.